Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm still here. Can't kick me out just yet. If you can take your Bibles and turn with me to the book of Romans chapter 3. I remember when I was a high school pastor, our high school group, we would take this annual trip down in Mexico because we would work with this parachurch ministry where we would spend one day to kind of build this home. It's a really simple home. We would use wood, nail and hammer. And it's really funny because it was very clear once we started building that house who was used to using a hammer, right? And so, the people who work there and so forth, with three, slams of a hammer, I don't even know what you call it, Thor's hammer, okay, right? With three just slams, the nail would be perfectly inside, just perfectly done. And the rest of us, it's embarrassing, but 16 times, we're just just using both of our hands. We have no idea what we're doing. The reason why I bring this up is because this morning, I am not going to advance a new idea for us. I'm not going to be driving a new nail this morning from the book of Romans. What I am going to do instead is I'm going to simply pound the nail, the idea that has been advanced up to this point in the last couple of weeks. If you're joining us for the first time, our church, we're in the book of Romans, in the gospel of God. And what we've been kind of unpacking through the last almost 3 chapters of the book of Romans is really that whether you are irreligious, whether you call yourself religious, whether you call yourself spiritual or not, we God has a case before all of us, all of humanity. And so this morning, I'm really gonna try to hammer this home and punch the ticket home. And here's kind of the big idea for all of us, especially if you're joining us for the first time. No one is righteous. If you're taking notes, that no one is righteous. Apart from Christ, there is not a single person here who has been unaffected by sin. In fact, apart from Christ, all of us, we stand guilty before God as sinners. All of humanity, we're kind of in cosmic enmity. We stand as enemies of God. I love how Paul kind of wraps it up with a summary statement in verse 9. Here's what he says in chapter 3, verse 9. He says, what then? Are the Jews any better off? No, not at all. For we have already charged that all, both Jews and Greeks, are under sin. So do you notice the universality of the language that he's using? Greeks, irrelevant. Jews, irrelevant. So whatever race you are this morning, whatever political affiliation, gender, irrelevant, no one is righteous. That's Paul's contention. No one is righteous. Every single person in the world, universally, apart from Christ, we are in this category where we stand guilty before God as sinners. Now, a lot of us, we're like, I got it. I've been here the last couple of weeks, and this is all I've been getting Sunday after Sunday after Sunday. But what I love is that Paul, he wants us to see the depth and how deep this fallenness of us, of humanity, really, really goes. And so what he does is he takes a bunch of different Old Testament passages, he kind of strings it together to demonstrate the depth of our fallenness. Look with me in verse 10. He writes, as it is written, none is righteous, no, not one. No one understands. No one seeks for God. All have turned aside. Together they have become worthless. No one does good, not even one. Now, you might be sitting there like, is this the whole rabbinic hyperbolic language? Seriously, Paul? Is he doing the whole exaggeration thing? No one is righteous, not one. No one does good. Is he exaggerating here? What's he trying to do? Well, I think what he's trying to do is demonstrate to us the depth of our fallenness, and here's how. That namely, this sin problem is not just an action problem. Are you hearing me? It is not just an action problem, meaning we don't just stand guilty because of bad things that we have done behaviorally or good things that we have failed to perform. This sin condition problem, it is not just an action problem, it is a human condition problem. That down to the very core of who we are, there is a fallenness to us. That we are unrighteous by our very nature. In fact, I love how my youth pastor a long time ago used to drill it into my mind. I would show up on Friday night and be like, hey, and he would just say, hey, you're not a sinner because you sin. You sin because you're a sinner. Out of your nature, you sin. Out of your fallen condition, you perform fallen action. And I would say, okay, good to see you, Pastor, just got here. And so he would drill this down. Okay, so let me kind of explain why I'm kind of trying to unpack this. I wonder if some of us, our view of what it means to be sinful or our fallen condition, we almost have this zombie apocalypse imagery and view of humanity. Let me try to illustrate this. Some of us, if you're unfamiliar with the zombie apocalypse genre, three of us woke up. We're really excited right now. This is what we've been waiting for. This is the sermon illustration you've been waiting for. But it's all the same thing, right? Some guy wakes up in a hospital. It's different. He steps outside and everyone's eating each other. Okay, so, but the premise is the exact same thing, is that the protagonist, their job is to stay alive. They don't want to be infected by this virus that's going to change their nature. And so the premise of the movie really is the protagonists, they better not do anything dumb. Their behavior, their external actions better be wise and calculated, swift and quick. But of course, they always do something dumb, right? It's like, oh, look at this closet, let's look inside, right? It's right all the time. And so what happens is the protagonists, because of their actions, on account of their fallen kind of stupidity, they get infected by this virus and therefore their condition changes. And so in the zombie genre, we go action drives condition. Oh, and a lot of us, we have that view of humanity. Like everyone is good, everyone is awesome, we're just having a wonderful time. But oh no, but if someone sins, oh no, someone sinned. And so because of that sin action, our condition now has been changed to sinful, and so now we're going to turn into this sin-loving creature. That's what we think. That is not the biblical picture of humanity. The biblical picture of humanity is that after the fall of Genesis 3, all of humanity, we are now born as a human race of spiritual zombies, if I could put it in that term. In fact, Paul says in Ephesians that we are dead in our trespasses and sins. David says in Psalm 51:5, oh my God, I was born in sin, and in sin did my mother conceive me. So it is not that action drives condition, it is that we are born with a fallen nature, and out of that fallen condition, that drives human action. And so we are fallen, not just in our action, but in our very condition, in our very human nature. We are born in sin. We are sinful by just nature. We're creatures of sin. We are not sinners because we sin. We sin because of our fallen condition as sinners. Now, some of us, we might be saying, but bang, like, but we do good things though. I mean, the writer said no one does good. Really? I mean, what about when someone helps an old lady cross the street? That's a good thing. Or what about, a parent who sacrifices so much for the future and well-being of their child? I mean, aren't those things good? I mean, yes, those things are noble. Those things are good virtues and praiseworthy. And the fruit, the human effect that it has on society, it's absolutely positive. But we also have to ask ourselves, when we say something is good, that someone does something good, according to whose standard of good are we using? Because for me, I have a very low standard of good. Like McDonald's, amazing. Amazing, right? Chick-fil-A, divine, right? Right? My standards, fast food is good. So whose standard are we? Because in God's eyes, he does not just look at the external form or even the result. Doesn't he look at the heart? He does not see as man sees. God looks at the heart. So God not only cares about the external form, but even the driving motivations. And so if anything is done not for God, not with God, not through God, in God's eyes, can that really be seen as good? I don't think so. Now, others of us, we might be saying something like, but really no one seeks after God? I mean, there's got to be some people that seek after God. I mean, like I started seeking after God. Surely everyone seeks spiritual things. Surely everyone seeks things beyond what they can see, but that is totally different than seeking the God of the Bible, as opposed to seeking a man-imaged a God that I'm gonna create out of my own imagination, where as long as I attend church once in a while and tithe a little bit, he's gonna help me to be really happy, so that when I show up to the pearly gates and he goes, why should I let you in? I can be like, well, I did the best with what I knew, and he's gonna be like, fantastic, that's the answer I've been looking for. It's totally different for someone to seek the God of the Bible versus something spiritual that's made up in our own imagination. And surely no one seeks God. And if there's anyone here who does seek God, if you do seek God, it is because God has first sought after you. Because no zombie injects him or herself, right, with the vaccine like, I'm done with this flesh-eating thing. I'm over it. Doesn't even taste good. It does not happen. Something beyond the condition of death must rescue. I love how Jesus put it in John 6:44. He says, no one comes to me unless the Father draws him. Now, some of us, we might be saying, but I thought we were all made in God's image. I mean, aren't we all wonderfully and fearfully made? Absolutely. Look, I have 3 kids. They're amazing. They're beautiful. And they're zombies. No, right? Of course they're wonderfully and fearfully made, without a doubt, but that's the paradox of the human condition. On the one hand, we have been stamped with the divine image of God. No other animals in the world carry the DNA and the image of God. Only humanity. But on the other end, our condition, there is something fallen about us. In fact, every single part of our being has been corrupted by sin. Do you know what theologians have called this corruption throughout history? They've called this total depravity. Total depravity. It doesn't mean utter depravity, that we are as bad as we possibly could be, but total depravity, meaning every single part of our being has been corrupted by sin. There's not a part of humanity that has not been touched, infected, affected by sin. Every single part of us. In fact, some theologians have coined this radical depravity, because the word radical, when you trace its Latin roots, it means root, core depravity. I love how R.C. Sproul, a theologian who is with Jesus now, and so total depravity is something of a distant past for him. I love how he describes the expansiveness of how much sin has touched every single part of our being. He talks about it this way: the fallenness that captures and grips our human nature affects our bodies, our physical bodies. That's why we become ill and die. It affects our minds and our thinking. Now, we still have the capacity to think, but the Bible says that the mind has become darkened and weakened. The will of man through which we act is no longer in its pristine state of moral power. The will, according to the New Testament, is now in bondage. We are enslaved to the evil impulses and desires of our hearts. The body, the mind, the will, the spirit, indeed the whole person has been infected by the power of sin. So you and I, we are not sinners because we sin. It is not sin action that drives sinful condition. We sin out of the fallen nature of who we are. We sin because we are sinners. Now, out of our fallen nature and condition, do actions show forth and flow out? Absolutely. This is exactly what Paul says next. Look with me in verse 13. Verse 13. Notice how out of the overflow of the heart the mouth speaks. Their throat is an open grave. They use their tongues to deceive. The venom of asps is under their lips. Their mouth is full of curses and bitterness. Notice how it moves into action in verse 14. Their mouth is full of curses and bitterness. Verse 15, their feet are swift to shed blood. In their paths are ruin and misery, and the way of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God, this is a summary statement, before their eyes. So you notice, out of the fallen condition, out of the fallen heart, every single part of our being corrupted by sin flows into action. First, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks, and our feet are quick to action. We sin because we are sinners. See, what Paul is trying to drive home for all of us is that when it comes to just all the human race, no one is righteous. No one is righteous in their actions. No one is righteous in their condition. We all, apart from Christ, stand guilty before God as sinners. No one is righteous, no one. Now, I realize some of us, we kind of grew up in the church. We heard this. Even now, you're like, I know this, like total depravity. I knew that when I was like 10 years old. And so our knowledge has preceded our excitement and our heart emotional affection agreement to this truth. And so I want to kind of punch this truth home with an illustration, okay? So I've kind of invited two people up. They're going to come up at this time. And so I want to kind of demonstrate to make you feel how no one is righteous. So on one side here, they're both staffers at our church. So here, this is Roman. He's going to represent for us, okay? He is not. He's going to represent for us God, okay? Not even close, yeah, okay? But okay. He's going to represent God, righteous, holy, perfect. Now, I love this man. I did his wedding, so I do love him. But he's going to represent for us unrighteousness. He's going to be Hitler. Again, not even close. He's great. He's awesome. But he's going to represent Hitler. Now, if of these two categories, if I asked you which category would you put yourself in apart from Christ, where would you want to place yourself? If you're anything like me, you're struggling right now. Do you know why you're struggling? You're struggling because on the one hand, you're like, okay, like, I know I'm not gonna be here. Like, God is way too holy. So I need to move myself as far away from the holiness and perfection of God as possible because he's so perfect. But you're like, I'm not Hitler. Like, he's like one of the worst people to ever live. He's utterly depraved. Not Ben. Some of you are mad at Ben right now. You're like, I know, no, okay? I'm not Hitler. And so you're like, but I'm not here. And so what you're tempted to do is you want to remove yourself from the category of God, but at the same time, you want to remove yourself from the category of Hitler. And so you're like, maybe I'm like here. Maybe I'm here. Not there, but certainly not here. And so here's what we've done. We've changed it to talk from categorical to a continuum. We actually think that we stand on a continuum, on a spectrum of righteousness, where we're like, I know I'm not as holy as God, but I'm not as bad as that guy over there. I'm not as sinful as those people over there. But what Paul is saying is, this whole thing is not a continuum. It is not a righteousness spectrum. You are either holy like God, or you are just unrighteous, guilty, and sinful. That's it. That's it. No one is righteous. Hey, could we give it up for our volunteers? Thanks so much, guys. Thanks, Roman. Thanks, Ben. I should have just left them up here for the rest of the sermon, just to stand there. Thanks, guys. No one is righteous. No one. Apart from Christ, we all stand guilty before God as sinners. Not even just our actions, but our condition. And so this brings us to two implications for us, two massive implications. Here's implication number one for those of you taking notes. None of us can achieve our own salvation. None of us can achieve our own salvation. There is nothing that we can do in our own human power to try to save ourselves. I mean, just logically, it's impossible. Now, there might be someone here saying like, well, if God made it clear what his standard and expectation was, if he made it super clear, then at least I can try. I can like morally try. I mean, if God said like, go to church every Sunday, unless you're sick, or give this much and do that action once a year. I mean, if God actually made it clear, then I could at least try, but that's impossible. Because think about it, how are we out of our fallen condition going to try to achieve a divine standard? In fact, you know how I know none of us can achieve a divine standard? We can't even achieve our own standards, our own human standards. Isn't that true? Like, we are hypocrites, not even to what God demands of us. We're hypocrites to what we demand of ourselves and other people. Like, have you ever been driving and you see someone texting and you're like, I hope that person gets a ticket and I am so incensed right now. I'm going to text my spouse and my friend about how angry I am while I'm driving, but I'm going to use Siri, right? Right? I mean, that's hypocritical. Or how about this one? Like, you might see someone gossip and slander, and you're like, I can't believe that person gossips. That person gossips. Can you believe that person slanders? And we fall short of our own virtues, our own values. And we think, well, God, if you just made it clear, if you made your standards clear, then I can follow it. Not a chance. Not a chance. We cannot, after not even being able to achieve our own standards, achieve God's standards. I love how Paul summarizes for us. I'm just gonna read it for us. He rounds out this section by saying in verse 19, now we know that whatever the law speaks, that's the commands of God, it speaks to those who are under the law so that every mouth may be stopped and the whole world may be held accountable to God. For by works of the law, no human being will be justified in God's sight, since through the law comes knowledge of sin. So here's Paul's point. Paul's point is God's divine standards, it can't save you. It just exposes you and me. It exposes our fallen condition. So let me illustrate this with kind of two imageries, okay? The first one, x-ray. So this week, and I got this person's permission, someone in our church had to go get x-rays, and what they found was that they had a fracture in their foot. Now, that's not the x-ray's fault. It's like, well, I was doing fine until I took the x-ray. No, the x-ray it's fine. The x-ray is good. The x-ray is doing its job. The problem is not the x-ray. The problem is the fracture. That's the problem. So the x-ray is good, but the x-ray is weak. Because even though the x-ray is good, it exposes, it reveals, it can't do anything to heal that broken fracture. In the same way, God's laws, God's standards, it's good. It is not bad. Oh, God's just a killjoy. He's a legalist. No, these commands reveal his generous character. He's good. But what it reveals is our condition. We're broken. We're sinful. We're fallen. But these commands, they're weak to save. It can't save us. It just exposes us. It exposes how fallen we are. For the non-science people, here's imagery 2. Mirror. You know, in the morning, when you wake up and you look in the mirror, that's not the mirror. It's not the mirror. The mirror is just doing its job. The mirror just reveals, it just reflects back what's true. I mean, whether you get a $3 mirror at the Dollar Tree or a $50 mirror at Bed Bath & Beyond, they both do their job. The problem is this in the morning, right? This mess that when I look in, I'm like, oh my gosh. The mirror is not evil, the mirror is good. This is the problem, but the mirror is weak. The hands cannot come out of the mirror to repair this in the morning. In the same way, God's law is good. It's good. But our hearts, our condition, it's bad. But God's law can't save. We cannot muster enough might to try to achieve something. None of us can achieve our own salvation. So if you're like sitting here and you're like, but I go to church every Sunday. I've gone to church my whole life. That cannot save you. But it could make you self-righteous. Some of us might be saying like, well, I've never murdered anyone. Yeah, but the law says, well, yeah, but in our hearts, through hatred, we have murdered people in our hearts. Someone might be saying, well, I've never committed adultery. And well, the law exposes and says, yeah, in our hearts, we may have gone to bed with a lot of people. It cannot save us. Our condition is that fallen. So here's kind of the immediate invitation for people in this room. If you're sitting here and you do not identify yourself as a Christian, we're really glad that you're here. And this sermon is not designed to tell you, oh, you're incompetent and you're just terrible. Now, that's not the heartbeat of the sermon. The heartbeat of the sermon is that there are many, many people who have tried to earn right standing with God. I have tried. And the conclusion is, I can't. I cannot. And so the invitation is, will you let go of your own human attempts to try to get right with God? If I just do one more good thing, maybe that will make me acceptable. If I just try to obey one more commandment, maybe that will make, no. If anything, if we're honest, the more that we try, isn't it true that the more that it reveals just how deep our own sins go. And so the invitation is just stop trying. Stop trying to earn your way to God. But others of us, many of us in this room, we actually do identify ourselves as Christians. We call ourselves, we became born again a long time ago. You might serve and be very active. And you know this. You're like, I know I can't earn my way into salvation. But if you believe that, does it show up in your life? So that when you walk into a room, are you the most grateful and joyful person in the room? Because you know that you can't achieve your own salvation, and so you know you're the biggest sinner in the room. And because you know that you're the biggest sinner in the room, you have received the most grace in the room, and so love, joy, peace, patience, it will have a tendency to flow out because you're so grateful, because you know there's nothing that you've done to achieve your salvation. Does it show up in that way? Or how about this one? When you look at other people who sin differently than you, who sin in ways that you think you would never sin, can you look at them and say, I know if God could save someone like me, a sinner like me, I know God could save them too. I'm gonna pray for them. Or is there a self-righteousness where we think like, well, I don't sin like that, I'm not like that, because we believe that there's nothing that we've done to achieve our salvation. There's gratitude, love flow out of us. That's implication number one. None of us can achieve our own salvation. But here's implication number two, and this is the good news. No one but righteous Jesus. No one but righteous Jesus can save us. Now, I can't unpack this too much because I want to save the thunder for the coming weeks as we kind of move on from chapter 3, verse 20, because we kind of get to the good news now. But I do want to start highlighting whet your appetite a little bit. And I want to do this by talking about Superman. There's something universal about Superman as a character. Have you noticed that? Like, you can go to any country in the world, they all know Superman. Like, grandmas know Superman. Like, if I try to describe like Superman to some Korean grandma, or the Hulk, like green, and she'd be like, me? You're like, what? Me get angry? Like, it wouldn't make any sense. But everyone knows, children know Superman, right? And in fact, when Superman died in the comics, it made mainstream media. That's how big of a news it was, right? So even if Warner Brothers ruined Superman, there's something universal about Superman. Why? Why does everyone love and know Superman? Now I have a theory. My theory is that there is something about Superman as a superhero that resonates with the fiber of our being that no other superhero does. And what resonates is that we believe in our minds that if there is anyone in the universe who could save us, it has to be someone like Superman. Why? Because of two things. One, he's completely transcendent. He's from another world. He has otherworldly power, and so we know he has the power to save us. He's totally transcendent. But on the flip side, he's just like us. He looks like us. He wears glasses. He works a 9-to-5 job. He falls in love. And so when we see him and we're like, he's just like us, but he's totally unlike us, there's something in our bones that makes us believe if there's anyone in the world who could save humanity, it's gotta be someone like him. Someone who knows what it's like to be one of us, who's literally walked in our shoes, but yet has the power and yet the compassion to be able to step into our world and save us. So here's how Paul describes Jesus in the beginning of Romans. He describes Jesus in this way, chapter 1, verse 3. He says, Jesus was descended from David according to the flesh, but he was declared to be the Son of God in power according to the Spirit of holiness by the resurrection from the dead, Jesus Christ our Lord. So on the one hand, Jesus descended from David according to the flesh. He was just like us. He was just like us. He had a human nature. He knew what it was like to be tired. He knew what it was like to have to honor his parents and how frustrating that could have been. He grew up with siblings. He went to go worship. He knew what it was like to be exhausted and thirsty and hungry. He experienced every trial and temptation, yet was without sin. He knows just what it's like to be, just like you and me. But on the flip side, he's a son of God in power. He's a son of God. He's otherworldly. He's totally transcendent. He's the God on the throne. And so when he comes to the earth, fully God, fully man, and he lives this perfect life, fulfilling all of God's standards perfectly, and he climbs on the cross and he dies the death as if he lived your life and my life, and he takes God's punishment, then he rises again, and by faith, he gives you his life. He transfers his perfect life into your spiritual account. There should be something inside of us that thinks, man, if there's anyone who could save me, it's gotta be someone like Jesus, who is totally otherworldly and transcendent, but he knows he was like me. He was a human being. There is none who can save like righteous Jesus, amen? And so if you're here this morning, and again, you do not identify yourself as a Christian, would you consider listening to what's kind of resonating in your heart? If there's anyone who can save me, it's gotta be someone like him. Will you consider trusting Jesus? And if you're sitting here this morning and you say, I am a Christian, and I believe everything, I believe only Jesus, righteous Jesus can save me, will you feel like the luckiest person in the world? Because you are. You are. Living Hope, may we believe this. No one is righteous. Apart from Christ, we all stand guilty before God as sinners. And none of us can achieve our own salvation. But thanks be to God, Living Hope, no one but righteous Jesus can save us. And he does. So let's pray.